happy to be with all of you today, and love the learning that goes on and learning how to use Zoom and watching everybody's cool backgrounds.
We're trying. So we'll start with Bill first up.
Oh, sorry. No, I don't have any. I'm caught up in the virtual background.
No problem.
Not a problem.
Not a problem.
I think Kim put it out there. You had the Brady Bunch photo. So you got to look up and I'll look down.
That's perfect. So actually, Kim, we'll start with you. Go for it.
There's my Brady Bunch.
There we go.
Oh, that's awesome.
Hold on. Let me change my background. We're doing serious news here.
Right.
And Mayor, I guess this is a question for you. Could you address, we've got event season coming up very, very quickly. Can you address how you're feeling about all the events that are coming to Reno, whether it be the economic impact or should we be gathering? I mean, the first one out the gate, I think, is Reno Rodeo, Art Town. Could you address that?
Yeah. Well, I think that people have to understand, to be quite honest, that we are going to go from, it's going to be a process. So we're going to go from red, yellow to green. It's not going to be red to green. We're not going to switch on this light switch and everything is going to be back to normal. I think we have to wait and see what the environment looks like. There are different things sort of coming down every day, whether it's you're seeing antibody testing, things like that, with contract testing, those kinds of things. So it's really going to depend on what that looks like and what the structure looks like. It's still very unknown, so we don't really quite know. However, I think we have to look at the history, certainly looking at China right now and seeing what they're kind of going through. We are not immune to that. And you're seeing that their cases are starting to rise, that they've slowly started to open up. So we have to really pay attention to what's happening. And I think it's just one of those things that we're kind of playing it day by day. It is a massive, massive loss to our region economically. You did see that Burning Man was canceled. That's $70 million of economic impact. That's huge for us. So it certainly is a blow. But I think, we just got to pay attention and see kind of what the climate looks like. And I also want to point out that we thought the surge was going to be around April 24th. And actually that has moved. It looks like it's now sort of in the second week of May. And the positive about that is obviously people are staying home, so it's effective. But people need to understand those dates change based on how many people are staying at home. Is everyone practicing social distancing and those types of things? So people need to understand that those dates change, because I don't want people out there thinking that, you said this big surge was coming April 24th and we're not seeing it. So I think people really need to realize that that actually changes based on how successful we are, sort of in this lockdown process.
What's your gut tell you? Can I just follow up with that? What's your gut telling you about this event seasons?
Well, part of me is hopeful, because I do think that you are going to see, like I said, some of those initiatives with antibody testing and things like that. However, there's still a population that might not be able to be integrated, which is, your elderly populations, people who have existing medical conditions, people who are very vulnerable, right? So we're not quite sure yet what that looks like. I'm hopeful because you are seeing advances almost every day. It seems like we're hearing of new testing, new initiatives. And I also think it depends on your city. Certain cities obviously are hot spots and others are not. I think so far Reno has been extremely fortunate, but you have to remember, like most cities, we don't have the massive testing that kind of gives us that data to say where we're exactly at. Right now, I am hopeful because we have been sort of, I guess, on the forefront because we were out early enough to make sure that we didn't overwhelm our hospitals and our frontline workers. And so I think for us, we are in a better position than most cities.
And Vice Mayor, do you have any thoughts on that with event season?
Well, I think the mayor is right. We have to approach it as though it's that, yellow, red, green kind of approach, because I think what will happen is we all want to get back to some sense of normalcy. We're all eager to do that. None of us wants to be in this a moment longer than we have to, but we also are going to follow medical advice. I'm heartbroken by the fact that Burning Man has had to cancel. I know I've been reached out to by a number of people who've asked about, hot August nights and the air balloon races and the air races and all of the things that make special Reno. But it'll be a very cautious approach, I think. And we're going to be, the mayor has stood up, for example, an advisory group yesterday of medical professionals that will help us to make those decisions. I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't play one on TV, but we're going to surround ourselves with the best medical information we can so we can make the best choices we can. And, I thank the mayor for having stood up that group.
Great. The question that we had from Cynthia Sandoval from 2, and I guess this is kind of a next step question about that beyond event season, is business. The different ones that we have out there, grocery stores, Target, things like that, are open and available, but we've got other businesses that serve other needs. So is it still, red, yellow, green, that sort of thing, same approach, or is there an onus to get some kinds of businesses going sooner rather than later? How do you decide that? How are we deciding that?
Mm-hmm. You want me to answer that, John?
Definitely love both of you to chime in and give
Okay.
your approach and what the city plans to do there.
Well, one thing is, I think we need to do everything we can to help businesses survive in this environment. And the council really is looking at different ways of doing that. One of the things we've talked about with the chamber and right now more than ever, it really has been beneficial to work with so many different community partners like the chamber. And one of the things we've been talking about is curbside commerce. Again, it is going to be sort of the red, yellow, green approach, but I think that we need to be flexible as a government to make sure that if there are ideas that businesses have, that we can vet them at the city of Reno and say, this could be a new approach. And I think people are evolving, their businesses are evolving, they're being creative, they're doing everything that they can. And I think we have to do the same thing on the government side, so we can be their partners to make sure that they are successful through this time. I think now more than ever, we have to be flexible. Government typically hands you a book and it says, here you go, this is the guideline. And I don't think that is a solid approach to helping businesses survive. I think now more than ever, we have to be flexible and innovative, and we have to do everything we can to make sure that they survive.
Mr. Vice Mayor, thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I'll just add, I think you can tell from where we've been, where I think we're headed, right? We had to issue some decisions very quickly. The mayor was out front of that. The governor followed suit. We have been working very quickly with our business licensing division and also our code enforcement to make good choices for our community from the safety standpoint. I think equally important will be when we reemerge from this crisis, how we approach that reemergence will really be a signal to not only each one of us in the community about our what we value in terms of safety, but also how we support each other as we reopen. It is not going to be, I don't think, an on and off switch, as the mayor said earlier. And so what we're going to have to do is be thoughtful. We're going to have to be partners with our business community, and we're going to have to help them understand, our job is not to say no to everybody. In fact, I think the opposite. Our job is to say yes and figure out how our businesses can succeed, thrive, and reemerge. And so I know that there have been guidance issued from the state level that then has to get refined through the local level, and some communities are handling that differently. But we're working very hard to make sure that we restart the economy, the small businesses, and working with the chamber. We know, for example, that our small businesses account for more than 70% of the jobs in our community. And so we're focused on it. I know that there will be an opportunity for changes, and we want to have everybody at the table. And so that's why working with partners like the Chamber of Commerce and Silver Economic Development Authority, Mike Kazmierski, are very important. And again, I think that this council really has made an effort to be accessible, to provide the tools in the toolbox that businesses are going to need to survive. And I think we've only just begun to scratch the surface. More is coming.
Mm-hmm. And some of those examples I would just like to add would be deferring business licensing fees, things of that nature. Also looking at how do we minimize trips to the grocery store? And one of those ways that the council has been looking at, certainly, the alcohol factor, right? People have been talking about those guidelines. And I think, looking at that, refining that to make sure that we can do whatever we can to be flexible. So let's just say a lot of people are going to the grocery store to buy alcohol. Well, we think that it probably is a good idea that there is another way to be able to access alcohol and things of that nature. So everyone's not running to the grocery store to buy it. And whether that's delivery, to homes, things like that. We're looking at the distilleries. Certainly, they've been hit really hard. And I think that these are things that we have to continue to look at to make sure we can be flexible so that they can keep their doors open. So we're very sympathetic to what the challenges businesses do face. And again, looking at ways like curbside commerce and things of that nature.
Good stuff. Sorry.
Let me just add, John, the mayor is a small business owner, right? Has been, like everybody else, required to shut down. We are very fortunate to have a mayor with that business background, because those practical realities don't always come to bear. Governments do not always operate quickly or in a practical manner. And so I think we're very fortunate that there's a lot of practical common sense that's going to be applied and really is the guide for how we move forward. We just have to be thoughtful about what our businesses need, and we have to be responsive to what they tell us. And when they say they have a need or they have a way to innovate or they have an idea, we need to be ready to listen.
Good stuff. We'll take Denise from Channel 8. Go ahead, Denise. I think you're unmuted now.
Willow Springs, but that's not till the end. So.
All right. Well, we'll move on down the list. We'll go with Bree from K-Winner.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Hi, Bree.
Hi. So I wanted to ask a question about alternative hospital sites. I know the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was checking out a few different areas throughout the area. Do you know what sites they're considering?
Yes, so we are, we've been working with the Army Corps for the convention center site, because obviously it's very large in scale and it's a central location. However, I'm not sure if you saw what Renown has stood up. It's pretty impressive. I think, our hope is that we certainly don't have to use that convention center site, but we're certainly ready to go if we need to do so.
Sure. Are there any additional sites?
Not right now. And, obviously the city of Reno has several sites and several maps that we've kind of looked at. We don't think it will be necessary, which is a good thing. Let's hope that it's not necessary. But we certainly have identified several sites, But the first one would be the convention center because it is so large, and we could put, probably in excess of 500 to 1,000 beds in that facility.
Okay. Is it okay if I ask another question?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I know there's been some concerns about assisted living facilities, like different cases and deaths happening at assisted living facilities around town. Is the city considering any restrictions when it concerns those facilities?
Well, we're certainly paying close attention, and usually those guidelines come from the Washoe County Health Department, and we will do whatever we can, any recommendations through the state and through Washoe County Health Department to make sure those guidelines are being followed. Again, I think, there is frustration because we don't have a lot of testing. And I think if we can get testing in mass scale, those types of facilities should be the priority list to make sure that we can identify those, because typically they tend to be more vulnerable than most.
Sure. Thanks.
Good stuff. We will go to Bob Conrad next.
Mayor, thank you for taking the questions today, and Vice Mayor Devon. I noticed there's been a lot of activity still at parks and some concerns at retail outlets, grocery stores and whatnot. I know this was discussed yesterday at the Reno City Council meeting, but I'm wondering what potential remedies are being explored for the fact that people are still going to parks like nothing is going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm certainly receiving a lot of complaints into my office. And I think you heard Arlo yesterday, the business department is receiving a lot of complaints about this. And I think, you've got some really good actors and you've got some bad actors. And it's very frustrating in a time where people are trying to do all they can to stay home, be diligent about this process. And it is really hard, especially when the weather gets better. People have a tendency to want to be out, and you can't blame them. And we certainly encourage people to get out and get some fresh air, and exercise, but we just don't want you doing it in groups, because that is not helpful. So we are working with our Parks Department to make sure that some of those parks, that people are not playing basketball, things of that nature, where they're doing it in groups. So we're really trying to pay attention to that. The idea is not to fine people. That's not what the goal is. It's not about the money. It's really about keeping our entire community safe. However, we have sent out several hundred notices to businesses, letting them know what the guidelines are. I had a lot of complaints about Lowe's and Home Depot, and we need them to also help us be a partner in this process by helping us put in those guidelines and making sure that they're being followed. And one of the things that I would like to see is a workers' protection order in place. And what I mean by that is making sure that if you are an essential business, that your workers are protected as well by wearing a face mask or some sort of face covering. We think that that's really important, and we need them to be our partners and understand right now more than ever, you also need to protect your workforce. And I think that's been a little bit frustrating because we are getting complaints of workers telling us that they don't feel safe at work, for various reasons. And some places of business were saying, well, they won't provide us masks and things like that. I think on the city side, we have to do whatever we can to help protect those workers as well, and the people that are shopping in those stores. And if that means limiting people to so many in the store at one time, and also providing sort of protective gear for their employees, and if it even is protective gear for your shoppers, I think those are things that need to be certainly considered, and we would like to see that be implemented certainly on the City of Reno side. Typically, a lot of that falls under the Washoe County Health District, but we can still continue to play our part by letting them know what those guidelines are. And I think if we can continue to message that and educate, then people are in a much better position to understand the side of where the city is coming from. But it's certainly a frustration. We're hearing it a lot. And we would just ask that right now you do whatever you can to help us, tackle the curve.
Thank you.
All right, we will move on to Bill now.
Back to me, great. So I guess my overall question is, are we now here in a kind of a stay the course mode, or are we still contemplating additional measures the city might take either on the, you've talked about some of these individual items, like the enforcement front or whatever. Do you see any areas where the city needs to step up its response at this point, and take greater action? Anything on the agenda you're contemplating on the whole gamut of possibilities?
Devin, do you?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think I think for me, my perspective is that we started, and of course, all of us were in crisis mode. So we were putting out as many fires as we could wherever we could. They were some very long days. It feels like we've gotten past some of that because we've been able to stand up the Regional Joint Emergency Operations Command, and that has taken some of the pressure off. I think the mayor continues to support our first line responders, so our police and firefighters. And so there are likely to be some policy changes that will affect those folks and perhaps how we are out in the service of others in the community. So I think there are some specific things that are likely to happen there. I also think that there are, we learn something new every day, right? People come to us with best practices. We have had the privilege of being a part of a lot of national organizations, whether the mayor is involved in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities. And so we're on conference calls all day long trying to get the best information from communities around the country. And some of those communities have been through their most peak period, and some are coming out of it, and some are, different places. So we continue to listen. I think there are likely to be some additional guidance about grocery stores, as we discussed yesterday during our emergency meeting, in terms of making sure essential workers have protective masks for sure, and also about how many people, for example, would go into a store in terms of square footage based on, how big of a place they have. So there are things, but there's not anything that's like specific or overwhelming coming. It's just now we're refining all of the things that we know we've put into place, and now we're trying to make best practices out of them. So I think that's kind of how I would approach, answering that question. Mayor Sheevy, I'm sure you have more specific, or you might not.
Yeah, the one that I was really worried about, like I said, was protecting the workers in these workplaces so that they can feel much more comfortable. But also, I think going back to many of the stores that are heavily crowded, one of the businesses was promoting a sale. That's just typically not helpful during this time. So we're paying attention to those things where they could actually be more harmful than beneficial. So we're really trying to stay on top of that. And for the most part, I do want to say there have been a lot of people coming together in this community. That's kind of who we are, and how Reno is really resilient. And so I want to thank those that have done it really well. I don't want, that to overshadow what everyone else is accomplishing. I think that that's really important. However, again, I really do worry about, some of the workplace conditions, and that's why we're asking them to be our partners in this initiative. And if you don't follow it, we do have the right to pull your business license. And if it's something that is happening continuously, then we would take that action, because you've got to be our partner in this and do it for the betterment of the community.
Great, thanks for going over that.
Good stuff. Wanted to try Denise one last time, if you're still there.
Hey, I don't really have any questions.
Hey, no worries.
Actually, I have a question for Vice Mayor Reese. I saw some video that you'd posted with a friend going through, wearing a mask and going through a neighborhood, and you were talking about minorities not getting the information they may need during this time. Is that a concern for the mayor and the vice mayor? What have you guys heard from these communities?
Yeah, I mean, always getting information out there is our number one concern. I mean, we can't educate people or share with them what's going on if, for example, they don't have access to the internet or not getting, consistent messaging through, traditional channels. I think it's a broader concern about just making sure that no one is left behind and that everyone gains access to the information. Obviously, in our community, we have a fairly large Hispanic population and a Spanish-speaking population, and making certain that those kind of materials are available in the Spanish language, for example, didn't happen right away, but quickly became the norm. And so, we were out over the weekend, and it was sort of a twofold thing. I was bummed that Burning Man had been canceled. We had a friend with an art car. We wanted to share with the community the 311 number because that's what the regional partners have been talking about in terms of how it is done. And that we put it on a Burning Man art car. It rode through some of our communities for a couple of hours, and just trying to share information so that if people do have questions, they can ask about it. Without that information, I think people, can become lonely. They feel isolated, and they're also unsure of kind of where we're headed. So I think it's good. It's always a good thing.
Denise.
Yeah, hey.
Hi. I think, and we talked about this at council, and I think it's going to be a much broader conversation, not only in cities, but across the country, because I think we have obviously seen in the numbers the different populations that this virus affects. And part of that needs to be cities will receive grants. And I think that's where we need to step up financially to help educate and make sure that these different populations that are so vulnerable receive access to care. We're seeing that because of that, it brings on underlying health conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure and things of that nature. And so I think we have to look at the grants that come in, whether those are CDBG or FEMA, whatever those funding sources look like, and make sure we're investing in the populations that are affected the most. And we're seeing it certainly in our minority populations. And that's going to be a very big, broad conversation. Like I said, not just in cities, but across the country. And I think it certainly brings it to the forefront. And I think it's important to have those conversations so we know that populations are not being left out. So I do think it was a conversation yesterday at the city of Reno. And I think we will put significant resources behind it like we need to be doing. I think, it's easily out of sight, out of mind. And certainly with this pandemic that it really brings it to the forefront, and rightfully so. We need to do whatever we can to make sure that people have access to adequate nutrition, adequate health services, adequate technology, and things like that, so we can reduce those populations that are most at risk.
Great, thank you.
Good stuff. We'll do real quick because we've got to get these folks to the 1 o'clock department meeting. We'll go with Bob if you have another question.
I'm good, thank you.
All right, great. Bree, anything else?
I think I'm good, thank you.
Good stuff. Cynthia, if you have anything to text here in the next second, go ahead. We'll do Bill, you good to go?
All set, thank you.
Great. And Kim, anything else?
Mayor, I just wanted to know if you had a mandate or an order that you're feeling that you need to put into effect for people to wear masks outside, or are you good with what you're seeing?
Well, I think, outside, you're probably a little safer.
I guess I should rephrase that, anywhere outside your house, in stores and such.
I absolutely think that people should be wearing protective gear, whether it's a bandana or a scarf or masked. And remember, the reason you're doing that is because you're actually protecting someone else. So if you sort of are out there, and I will tell you this, I have had complaints into my office saying, I went to, so-and-so's business and they were not wearing a mask. And I felt extremely uncomfortable being in there because no one was wearing a mask. And I think that if we can all do our part and have consideration for each other, let's do that. It's a very simple thing to ask. I would say wear a mask.
But you're
And
not
again,
looking at a mandate or an order or anything more extreme?
Well, I, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it right now, everything is under the governor's directive. I am just really pushing that message to wear a mask. And I think just right now, people would feel a little more comfortable. And also there are people, and the reason why we do that is we know there are people, what they call shedders, and they could be asymptomatic and not know that they have the virus. And then there are people too, which I've heard that have said, I think I had this back in January and feel like they had it already. And now I don't need to wear a mask because I might have the antibodies. I've heard that too. And I think you have to be very careful about just assuming that you have had it and that you're also not going to get it. And so I think people need to take every precaution that they can. I guess, what would be the harm in wearing a mask? And what would be the harm in letting someone else know that you're trying to watch out for them? And so that's really why I wanted to push that message. And I felt strongly about it for a long time. I mean, again, I think you have to look at what history shows us. And when you see China and things like that, we should be learning from a lot of their practices because they've been there, done that. But again, I am a big proponent of masks. I think if you can wear one, you absolutely should. And I know, people might disagree with that, but right now I think we should do everything we can to mitigate the spread of this virus.
All right, good stuff. Vice Mayor, any closing thoughts from you?
No, I think I thank you all for being here on this format. I do hope you understand that the mayor and the city council members, everything we do is not with a heavy hand. It's with a full heart, meaning we look at it and we try to figure out what is the best thing we can do for people. We aren't trying to be, power grabbing, or we're not trying to do something more than other people. We're not trying to be in the headlines. We're trying to keep people safe. And so if there is a desire to see orders be in place, it's because we believe that those would be a good thing, and not because we're trying to control people, but because we think that, the evidence and the health-based practices support it. So I thank everybody for their participation and stay home for Nevada.